So, is the Raleigh housing market starting to shift towards a buyer's market? Well, if you're thinking about relocating to Raleigh, you're really going to want to stay tuned because today I have the latest market stats that just came in for April 2025, and I'll be going over the market trends in the towns of Raleigh, Cary, Apex, and Holly Springs. Today I'm filming from the beautiful Bass Lake Park, which is located in the town of Holly Springs. It's a town park. I was out today showing homes in Holly Springs to clients, and I decided to come by here because it's just a beautiful day around this lake, and I wanted to show you how beautiful the park is. This 54-acre park has walking trails that go around the lake. In fact, it's about 2 miles all the way around the lake, and then it also connects to other parks within the town, such as Sugg Farm. You can rent canoes, and you can also fish on the lake. You do have to have a fishing license, but there are catfish. In fact, they stock them every year for catfish, and there's also bass and some other fish in there. So this park is always very popular. And then there's a recreation center that you can rent out for events, which is great. And as I mentioned, it's a great park and it's located right here in Holly Springs. I've been a resident of Holly Springs for 17 years, and this park has served as a backdrop from family photos to prom pictures and graduation pictures. And my kids have just loved coming to this park. We walk the trails a lot, and it really is a wonderful park to have here in our small but growing town.
Hi, I'm Trish Thayer, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm a local real estate agent here in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, and I help clients just like you relocate to our area. And while I specialize in the luxury market, defined here as homes over $750,000, I work with clients across all price points throughout the triangle. If you watched last month's update, I said I was going to add a new statistic to this market update, and that's price reductions, because we are starting to see them in our area depending on location and neighborhood. And we're also starting to see very slightly that days on market are starting to fluctuate. So it's going to be really helpful to track how often sellers are adjusting prices to attract buyers. And this is going to give us even more insight to the shifts that are starting to happen around our area, and also help you strategize whether you are a buyer or a seller, or if you're thinking about relocating to the Raleigh, North Carolina area. So we want to make sure that we're really paying attention to these numbers to have a pulse on the market. And as always, in today's market update, I'm going to be going over the key statistics such as median home price, days on the market, months of inventory, as well as closed sales and inventory levels. And then of course, I'm going to be adding that statistic of price reduction.
And also make sure you stay to the end of the video because I'm going to do something a little different on this video. I'm going to go over the highest price sale for each town for the month of April. Okay, let's kick things off with Apex, where the median home price is $955,000. That is up 3.2% over last year. And while it did decrease slightly over March's numbers, we still feel that Apex has a very steady housing growth market, and it's still a very desirable place to buy a home. And as I mentioned in past videos, sometimes prices fluctuate from month to month depending on how many homes are actually on the market. When we look at closed sales, they are down 14.6% to 35 homes, and days on the market is now up 6 days. So that's up 50% from last year. But keep in mind, this stat may sound more dramatic than it actually is, because a 50% increase is only going from 4 days to 6 days. That's a 2-day change. It really is not very significant, but it does show that maybe buyers are taking a little bit more time to make a decision on a home. They're waiting through the weekend and making that decision the beginning of the week. And then taking a look at months of supply, which is the gauge of how many homes are on the market. This is up 112% in Apex in the luxury market to 1.9 months, and active inventory did stay steady at 66 homes. This tells us that inventory is holding, but homes are selling slightly slower. And then one new stat that I mentioned I'm going to track is that Apex had 29 price reductions in April, and that's a sign that sellers may be adjusting expectations to align a little bit more with the current buyer demand. Now when we take a look at Cary, where the median home price is $950,000, and that's down about 7% compared to last year, and also down from March's number of $987,500. So this marks a little bit of a price softening in Cary. and where we're also seeing that closed sales were down 14% and they were about 47 for the month. And while days on the market is just still 4 days, that's up 33%, but again, that's only a 1-day increase. So still, homes are selling extremely fast in Cary. Months of supply rose to 2 months of supply, that's up 81%. Again, not very significant. 2 months on the market, 2 months of inventory is still very low. Where I had mentioned in earlier videos that 4 to 6 is a balanced market between buyers and sellers. And then when we look at active inventory, that did climb to 94, so that's up about 68%, which is actually a good thing. As I mentioned again in previous videos, we've had such low inventory levels that it's actually nice to have some houses and some opportunities for buyers. And then when we look at price reductions, there was about 54 price reductions in April, so about 40 to 50% of the inventory had a price reduction. That's suggesting that a lot of sellers are working to find the right price point in this competitive landscape. All right, next, let's take a look at Holly Springs, where I'm at today. And in Holly Springs, we're seeing the median home price is $843,500, which is down about 3% over last year. And that median home price is about flat from what we saw last month. So interestingly enough, closed sales are up in Holly Springs. They're up 17.6% to 20 homes, and that's the largest percentage increase. Actually, the rest of the towns that I'm talking about actually had a decrease in closed sales. And we were talking last year that the amount of closed sales was the lowest since 2008. And 2025 may also be a down year in regards to closed sales. Days on market is now 5 days. Again, that's up 25%, but that's only a 1-day increase, nothing significant. And months of supply is holding steady at 2%. And of course, we look at active inventory, and that's up about 25% to 40 homes. There were 19 price reductions in April, so again, about 50% of the inventory had a price reduction, suggesting that the sellers are still trying to price fairly but close enough to buyer expectations. Finally, let's take a look at Raleigh, where the median home price is $1,005,000, and that's also down 4% from last year's numbers. And then slightly lower than March's numbers. And so while prices are holding steady, we're starting to see a gentle downward trend there in the Raleigh market. Again, for homes $750,000, I just wanted to reiterate that I am only looking at homes $750,000 and above, which we consider the luxury market. And then when we look at closed sales were down 18.6% to 107, but Raleigh continues to lead in overall transaction volume. Days on the market in Raleigh dropped to 6 days, and that's down about 25% over last year, not significant. And it's a little bit better than what we saw in March at 20 days. So I wasn't sure what was happening in March, but that days on the market was really high. Could have been a lot of the new construction that we're seeing in Raleigh. And then when we look at months of supply in Raleigh, it's at 3.8%, which is up about 60%. And that is starting to move closer to that balanced market of 4 to 6 months. But worth noting here that there's a big difference between buyer market and seller market across the towns and across neighborhoods. You can really go from one town to the next or one neighborhood to the next, and one might be a buyer's market and one might be a seller's market, just with homes being on the market a little bit longer, not really looking at supply, but looking at days on the market. And in fact, you can have 2 separate houses in the same neighborhood, and one sells in 2 days and one takes 20 to 30 days. So I caution when we look at these numbers that you really have to go hyper local with these statistics and really dial in on a specific neighborhood or town that you're considering relocating to. And that's something I can help you with. As I mentioned, I'm happy to run any of those numbers for you, especially where we're looking at certain markets. We're moving on to active inventory. Active inventory hit 405 homes, which was a 37% jump over last year. So that's probably the most telling metric of the month here in Raleigh. And when we look at price changes, we had about 123. So when we compare that to active inventory, it's about 1/4 of the inventory. So a lot less than what we saw in some of the other towns, just making sure that we're pricing correctly. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I had another bonus to this month's video, and I'm gonna briefly go over some of the top single family homes in each town. In Apex, the highest sold home in April was located in the community of Ellsworth, and it was located at 2524 Silas Peak. And this was a custom built home. It was built in 2024. This home sold for $2.2 million. It was just over 6,000 square feet and sat on 1/3 of an acre. It was built by Amworth Homes, and it sold for 1% under listing price. Then when we look at the top sale in Cary, that was located at 6829 Palaver Lane, and that's located in the luxury neighborhood of Copperleaf. And this home was built in 2011, had about 5,800 square feet on 1/2 an acre, just over a little 1/2 an acre. And it was on the market for less than 24 hours, and it sold 2% over list price. And then when we move on to Holly Springs, where 209 Morning Oaks Drive was the highest price sale in Holly Springs in April, and that's located in the golf course community of 12 Oaks. And this home was built in 2011, as well as the other one, 4,250 square feet, 0.39 acre. It sold for $1,255,000, which was about 5% over list price, and it sold in 3 days. And then in Raleigh, we move on to the prestigious neighborhood of North Ridge Country Club, where a 2024 parade of home built by AR Homes sold for $3,350,000 for cash. It sold $250,000 under its original price. And this home was about 5,413 square feet, and it sat on just over 1/2 an acre. And it was a former parade home in 2024. As I do in all of my market updates, here are a few takeaways for the month of April. Price reductions are starting to become more common, especially in the towns we discussed today. And so this is telling us that sellers are adjusting to a more selective market. And while days on the market may be up slightly, the actual number of days on market is still extremely low. And in most cities, the homes are selling within a week. Compared to March, median home prices have dipped a little, while Holly Springs and Raleigh remain mostly flat. And then of course, inventory continues to climb slightly, giving buyers a little bit more options and maybe some more negotiating power depending on how long those homes have been sitting on the market. However, we are still in a seller's market, but mentioned before, there are certain towns and even certain neighborhoods and certain houses that are experiencing a buyer's market, meaning the homes are sitting on the market even though inventory levels are low. So these homes still are sitting there because the buyer is not seeing the value in the home, and so the days on market are accumulating, and then home prices are starting to decrease because of that. So if you're a luxury buyer, now's the time to take advantage of increased inventory, some softening at certain price points in certain markets, and then working with an experienced agent such as myself means that you'll have a strong negotiator in your court when it's time to put an offer in. On the seller side, pricing your home correctly from day one is most important. I've said it before in my previous videos. Buyers are active, but they're also very informed, and they're cautious, and they want to make sure that they see value in the home. And homes that sit too long may get overlooked, or they require price drops later. So you're chasing that price. So coming to market with a compelling price, professional marketing, staging, and a strong presentation and a strong marketing plan will help you stand out faster for the most amount of money. If you'd like stats for a specific neighborhood or a different city that I did not cover in this video, please reach out. You can send me a message and I'd be happy to get those numbers for you. And if you like what you heard in this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future videos I put out about living in the Triangle area of Raleigh and the surrounding suburbs. Once again, I'm Trish Dare, and thanks for stopping by. I'll see you on the next video.